I'm Jerry Pike. I'm the director of the Learning Resources Center. We're being filmed today, as Allison was telling you, so if you haven't signed the release form, please do so. And if you don't want to be filmed, then just sit at the back of the room. And this is Allison Bostwick, and she and I coordinate these workshops. And we're behaving strangely because we're being filmed, and we have to be on record for all the people. We should say hello to the virtual people who will be viewing this later. Hello, welcome to the workshop. You're not here now, but you'll be here later. Okay, I just wanted to start by letting you know that the resources for, well, the calendar of events for this is available online, so as are many resources that you might find useful. So if you just go to the campus homepage under Current Students and click on Learning Resources, the third one, it will take you to this page, which then you just click on the first bullet, and that takes you to our homepage. If you use any computer in the LRC, it just defaults to this home page. But this mouse is not working. So the schedule for all of the workshops is here in the left-hand menu, as are many other resources that I think you would find of value. Don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but for example, the Writing Center is a great resource on campus to you. It's free, and you can use it up to 3 times a week. Tutorial Center will have a schedule of tutors on campus. The workshop calendar is right here, and there's another series of workshops on writing skills, which kind of falls every other week in here. Resources is just generally, they're just academic resources. And so that can help you. They're actually indexed for you. So if you're involved in some, sort of typical activities that you're engaged in as students are covered there with resources available to you. So anyway, I think that's enough of that. So the plan today is to talk to you a little about note-taking, find out why you're here, first of all, what it is you're hoping to get, and then practice. So I think, if I can get this to go off. Okay. Let's see. You can just take one of these as they come around. So I'm going to have you do a little note-taking exercise in just a few minutes. But these are really the notes on what I'm going to be talking about today, so you don't actually have to take notes in the note-taking workshop, ironically. Thank you. So you can just concentrate on listening. All right, so let's start with why you're here. So what is it about note-taking that you have questions about, or that has caused you some difficulties in the past? What would you like to get out of today, I guess, is what I'm asking. Yes?
I think I take too many notes. It takes me forever to get through my studying.
Okay. Too many notes.
You want to be able to narrow it down.
Okay.
Ways to effectively take notes.
Okay, you mean techniques or ways? Okay. Ways, techniques. We are going to cover that. Okay, oops. Is that a hand or your, no, just in your hair?
I just have disorganized notes.
Maybe
What
you
are-
want to turn your notes into something that you can use.
Okay, making them useful, huh? What are some of the problems you encounter with note-taking? Why is it so challenging?
I never take notes because I don't know what things I need to take notes.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, can't decide what to note. Yeah, that's good. These are all good. Other just challenges with note-taking? Yes.
The professor talks much faster than I write.
Yeah, okay. I think everybody talks faster than most people write, so. Okay. That seems to be one of the more popular ones, right? Okay. Anything else that's missing up here that we need to address?
I have too many notebooks.
Too many notebooks. Okay. You know, this is that problem is such a great problem. Because, you know, I think a lot of people think of note-taking as just a kind of an exercise in recording information. You know, almost like you're just being an audio recording device of some kind. But it's really a learning tool. And I think if you start thinking of it in terms of like a staged learning tool, that there are things you do initially, you want to return to those notes and do other things with them, and then return to those notes and do other things with those, right? So to start thinking of it not as just one event where you're trying to copy down everything somebody says, which is impossible for most people. Usually in a note-taking workshop like this, they'll say, well, really you need to think about the key concepts and write down the key concepts. And the problem with that advice is that it's often difficult when you're sitting in a room to even know what the key concepts are. Like this poor guy says, I don't take notes. You know, he's sworn them off entirely because I don't know what to write down. I don't know what's important. So, I mean, there are some clues about what's important, and what would some of those clues be from a, yeah?
When the teacher kind of emphasizes, like, well, not emphasizes, but kind of, I guess,
Well, emphasizes is actually a good word. So how can a teacher emphasize something to you as a student? What are some techniques for doing that?
Reading guides.
Okay, so you can have repetition. So if you hear it more than once, that should be a clue. You know, if it's said to you more than once, you go, well, that's probably significant. He or she has said it more than once. What are some other techniques for emphasis?
They all have reading guides usually, so you can go and see exactly what they want you to read.
For reading guides, okay, so
Like on Google.
yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, that's another question, actually. There are different contexts in which we take notes. The most common one is in a lecture situation. But you also take notes when you read, I hope. I mean, you should. And so that's a similar activity, but it's not quite so, you know, there's not so much pressure involved because there's not, the time factor is kind of different.
That's my problem with too many notes, is because my classes are online.
Uh-huh.
So all we do is read.
Right.
And I just feel like it takes forever to get through all the reading because I'm having to take so many notes. I'm not sure what's going to be on the tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in some regard, as far we also have a test-taking workshop, and I'd encourage you to come to that one. But which also, when you take the test-taking workshop, we say, well, you know, people think of tests as isolated events, and they're not that either. They're also just one in a series of educational events. So I think, you know, it's tougher with online and reading and sort of trying to figure out what's of most significance. You can do that by inquiring with your instructor, of course. You can do that by the text you're reading, which themselves tend to repeat ideas that are most significant. You know, they tend to emphasize various things. And you can find a way to just highlight those sections so that you can go back to them quickly later on when you're getting ready for a test. Because your note-taking really typically should just be a way of building your knowledge, you know, making your knowledge deeper, and also then preparing you for an exam, right? So it's not just recorded information. It's like, I'm going to use this as a study tool, basically, and we're going to talk about how to do that today. Okay, so how else will a teacher tend to emphasize something, though? So they can repeat things. It might be in a study guide. How else does it happen?
Examples?
Sorry?
Examples?
Yeah, usually if there's some kind of an example offered. So, because if there's an example, that means that the concept is significant enough that the instructor thinks, well, I need to illustrate this in some way to make it clearer to you. So if you're being offered an example, yeah, that's probably something to write down. And there's one other big one. One really big indicator that something matters, or you would think of as a key concept. How do teachers let you know something matters?
They say it's going to be in the test.
So yeah, they usually don't do that, do they? Because usually the way that works is the poor student, you know, says, "Is this going to be on the test?" And the instructor gets really indignant, you know, say, it shouldn't matter if it's going to be on the, it's all important, But they may say, some may say it's going to be, or they may say, listen, this is important, right? They might just tell you this is important. But they might also write it on the board. That's the thing. So if it's on the board, write it down. And by the way, if it is on the board, what I would recommend you do is you keep a separate sheet of paper when you're in class, or sheets of paper, and put them in this sort of landscape, mode. Not like this, but like this, because this more closely resembles this in film terms, aspect ratio, right? In other words, it's the same aspect ratio as the board, basically. So you can then write things on this piece of paper in the exact location they occur on this board, and that's a huge memory tool for most of us. Especially if you're more visually inclined as a learner, because basically what you're doing is you're taking a snapshot of something that's going to trigger a visual memory in your brain. And I would also, by the way, recommend that you come to the Learning Styles workshop if you haven't done that, because it might help familiarize you with what kind of learner you are. Many of us are highly visual. Allison and I are both pretty much visual. And if you think about it, most of the information you get as a student is verbal. And in the Learning Styles assessment, it's set up under, arranged according to some learning theories by a fellow named Kolb, and he says that, and it's pretty, it seems pretty plausible, that your preference is either for words or images, and you fall somewhere along the lines between, let's say images and words. And so if you're over on this side, on the visual side, as many of us are, and by the way, I'm an English teacher and major, so there's no logic here, clear, direct logic. I just happen to be highly visual, but yet I'm a word person. But in any case, if you're getting a lot of input that's over here on the word side, and you're a visual person, you're going to have to find some way to kind of convert that information in a way that's useful to you. And one way to do that is by putting the paper in the form of the board. When you write it, it's almost like it's not so much the words so much as where they're written on the board, and you're recalling what event took place when those things got written on the board. All right? So it's, if you think about, is it easier for you to recall a conversation you've had with a friend about something academic, or something you've read in a book about something academic? If the former is the case, then it's a good chance you're more visual. You just like the visual memory to help aid your memory. Your recall, I mean. All right, so let's start with why don't we start with a really common form of note-taking, and I'm just going to sort of show it to you. It's called the Cornell Method, and it looks like this. And this is intended primarily, it actually could work in a variety of situations, but it's intended primarily for use in a classroom. And what you do is you take your standard piece of paper and you divide it like this. You actually draw lines on it like this. And actually, at this point, you could take notes on this, I think, probably. Take notes on note-taking. So this is called Cornell because that's where it was developed. And it works like this, basically. You put your notes over here. And by the way, when you take notes, leave a lot of space between them when you take them. Try to write them as neatly as possible, even if it's going to slow you down, but that's okay too, because slowing down is going to relax you. And that's a whole lot of what's going on here is you've got anxiety because, as you say, you can't keep up with the speaker. So that gives you additional anxiety, makes the process even harder. So relax, take your time. One of my colleagues said the other day, for note-taking, what she tells her students is just write as many words as you can, which was new to me. I thought, well, that's kind of wild. But, what she's talking about is don't worry about key concepts. Just write down as much as you comfortably can as you sit there. And don't be complicating it further by thinking about, well, is this important or not? All right? And actually, this technique is designed to sort of help you with that process. So you take your notes, you leave plenty of space between what you write. And why do you leave plenty of space between what you write in your notes? Why would you want to do that?
To add more, something maybe
maybe the teacher will say it in the future.
Sure. Yeah, because that's very good. So you can add more later. And how much later?
Once we see.
As little later as possible, right? In other words, you want to get back to your notes as soon as you can, preferably that day. I mean, preferably within an hour, but most of us don't have lives that allow for that. But definitely within the day, all right? Before you go to sleep. Return to your notes, and then you can just recall what happened and you can add whatever is missing here. Ideally, you have an hour after class, sit down with your notes and just flesh them out in between and leave plenty of space to do that. Because, you know, think about it. You're going to be studying these things, right? And as you study them, if what you're looking at is this kind of cramped, you know, tortured document, it's, you know, it's what you're going to get upstairs is this cramped, tortured experience. So, you know, just make it legible, take your time, leave plenty of space. All right, so you've got notes in this section. In this section, you have usually something, there's sort of notes on the notes. Okay, so that means anything that you want to say about what you've written here, you can put over here. In other words, you might want to come up with a set of symbols. You know, it's going to vary from person to person. One of my symbols that I like to use is this because it's simple and it just means that something is important. All right, so I would use this to say, well, this is important. I would then use a symbol like this with a circle around it, meaning it requires action. So it's something I've got to, because, you know, my note-taking has changed over the years from being a student to being a teacher and a quasi-administrator. So I go to meetings. You know, you take notes from meetings. Well, what do I need to know? I need to know what's sort of important from the meeting. So, you know, you want to mark what's important, but then more importantly, you go back and mark, well, what do I have to do stuff about? You know, what am I is going to require some extra activity on my part? So it's just very simple. You know, I might have something like this because I'm confused. And so if I'm confused, then I'm going to use this to say, well, here's a section of my notes that I'm confused about. So I'm either going to ask a question in class, or I'm going to go talk to my instructor later, or maybe I'm going to talk to a tutor later, right? Or maybe something comes up where a question has been, you know, a lot of times teachers will raise questions as a discussion thing, you know, just sort of, here's a good question to sort of help us better understand a topic. If you come upon one of those, you can just circle that and say, well, maybe this is a good question to pursue for a research paper or something like that. All right? So it doesn't really matter what the symbols are that you use. It just matters that you have some because it speeds up the process. Instead of having to write out the whole thing like, wow, this is puzzling, or I need to ask about this, you've already done that, right? So you've already got a kind of abbreviated way of indicating that. Yes?
Do you put the symbols on that column, or do you put it right next to the notes?
I would put the symbols in this column adjacent to whatever the note is to which the symbol pertains.
Okay.
All right? Any other questions about the symbols and how they work? It's a really popular method of note-taking. At the bottom of the other part of this is at the bottom you put a summary. And by the way, you know, there are various takes on Cornell and how to do it. If you just Google Cornell note-taking, you'll see probably 10 variations on how to do this. But the main thing is this. You've got a tool available to you that has already kind of separated information. And so it's something that's just going to make your whole process more efficient. That's the point. Right? So it's made ahead of time. You've put some thought into it ahead of time, so it saves you time in the moment of the lecture or whatever the event is going on. Now, at the bottom of this page, what you're supposed to do in the most sort of typical method with Cornell is you summarize what's written up here. Okay, now summary, in just a minute I'm going to give you a little mini lecture on Bloom's taxonomy, and we'll use that to try another note-taking technique called clustering. But right now I would tell you summary is one of the strongest tools you have for building memory because it forces you to look at a lot of information and kind of boil it down to something smaller, which is that's an intellectual process, but it also forces you to put it in your own words, and that's really powerful in terms of memory and recall and just understanding generally. You know, you've all had that experience, right, where you think you know something, and then you're going to explain it to somebody, and you're talking along, and you go, oh, well, no, you know, and you have to think about it, because what you're really doing is embedding this more deeply in your knowledge base to, you know, what is this thing actually in terms of myself and my own understanding. So you summarize it. So what my point here is that in summarizing, you're already turning this into a learning tool. It's no longer just a recording, because you're giving your brain a chance to process it by summarizing it. So that's really good. And once you've summarized it, you can use this as a test preparation tool, because what you do is you take another piece of paper and on your notes, and you just cover up the notes part, right? You would just cover this part up. You would read the summary, and from the summary you would recall as many of the details as you can on the page, right? And that's going to help you further summarize, but it's also going to help you figure out what you don't really know. Okay, so it's a great tool. It's easy. And you've already done the work, right? You've already taken the notes, you've already summarized, so now you're just going back to it. The more times you return to something, the better your chances of really knowing it and understanding it. All right. So, any questions about this?
I guess, just to be clear with the notes on the notes, like, there's not going to be, I would assume that the symbols you create aren't nearly as, there's not going to be as many as there are notes, right? 'Cause it's
Sure.
the important stuff.
Sure. In other words, the symbols are going to kind of, they're going to kind of represent whatever it is that you typically, sort of categories of response, basically, that are typical. You know, in other words, like if you're, you can use them any way you want, right? But maybe you're listening to a lecture and you're just looking for key points in that lecture that pertain to your research project. Or you're listening for key points in that lecture, so you might put an R in over here, because that stands for research, something to return to. Or maybe you think it's clearly on the test, and so you put a T, because it's pretty clear it's going to be on the test, right? So again, it's just sort of, what are the things that are typically asked of you as a student? Those are the things you want to represent with symbols. But you're perfectly able to also write over here if you want, you know. If you want to articulate a question about something that you've written in notes, then just write it out. And then you know that it's you, you know, this is kind of you, and this is kind of it, right? So this is you responding to it. And instead of trying to do it all in one place, you've separated it, which makes it a lot easier to do. That's all. Yeah.
I've heard it that the left side, the column is for, like, you have to write, or like you're supposed to write a question there.
Uh-huh.
And then in your notes is the answer, and you write it like adjacent to it.
Right.
So you can fold the paper over and use it, question, and then kind of.
Exactly, and that's one of those variations. You know, if you Google, again, if you Google Cornell Method, there's a lot of really nice variations. Just look at them and see which one would work best for you, or try different ones. Okay, other questions? Okay, well, let's try something else. And this is a note-taking technique that helps really particularly visual learners. And some of you may have used it. It's called clustering. And what it does is it allows you to kind of provide a visual representation of what you're hearing without having to really engage in a lot of words. Right? It's more a visual thing than a verbal thing. And it is it's something that you could actually do. I guess you could conceivably do this even in a Cornell method, but typically you do it on sheets of paper, and as with any note-taking, use lots of paper. That's the idea. Right? Just don't worry, this is not a time to conserve paper. More the better. And clustering works like this. So who had a lecture this morning? Some kind of class that involved lecture. So would you mind turning that off, please? Thanks. Who had a lecture of some kind? Okay. What's the subject?
Sociology.
Sociology. Excellent. So what was the main topic of the lecture?
Research.
Research? How to do research? Good. Okay. So here's what you would do. You would write on a piece of paper research, because usually your instructor is going to say, sometimes they'll actually give you a preview of what they're going to be talking about that day. But typically, they start talking and go, okay, we're going to be talking about research. So research goes in the center. And what did you find out about research relative to sociology?
There's just different ways to research things.
Okay, and what's one of those ways?
Like face-to-face.
Okay, so you would say face-to-face, and what is it about face-to-face research? Do you remember anything?
Well, it's micro-sociology. That's what face-to-face is, and macro, which would be like surveys.
Okay, so this is micro.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you see how this is going here? It's just you're not having to write out what the connections are between the things. You're just showing the connections between the things visually. So it's less words, more just kind of, well, what are the relationships of ideas? Was there anything else about, what are some other research techniques?
No, like surveys, like random surveys.
Okay, surveys. And are there different kinds of surveys?
Yeah, you can do like a variety of questionnaires
Or
phone surveys.
what?
Phone surveys.
Phone, okay.
Internet.
Okay. Did you learn anything about how to do some of that stuff?
Yeah, well, she's prepping us for a paper.
Okay, good. Okay. So are you thinking of what kind of survey might you be doing?
I
Haven't thought about it? Okay.
Topic yet.
All right. Anything else in terms of research? Surveys? This is going to, by the way, no one is ever going to answer a question again in here because, look, I'm just grilling you about what happened in your, So.
That was pretty much, there probably was a few other ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me point out something, actually. Even though it appears that I'm torturing her by asking her for the details of her lecture this morning, her answers to those questions are probably actually greatly enhancing her recollection of that event. And in fact, it's going to be twofold now because now she was put in public. She was put, sort of in a place of, well, answer this question in a public setting, so she's likely to remember this event as well and what she said here. So if that's sort of where, one of the questions on the learning styles assessment is, when you think about yesterday, do you think of it in images or do you think of it in words? So just think about that for a second. And, the answer to that question is one indicator as to whether you're visual or verbal. So, if you think of it in images as I do, then that's a good indicator. If you think of it in words, then those of us who are visual just can't even imagine what that would be like. So here's a case where she has been given an opportunity to have a kind of narrative memory from having spoken in a public place. That's why study groups are really good for visual people. All right, so let's try an experiment. Well, first of all, are there any questions about this clustering thing? It looks kind of messy, right? It is. But again, it's just easier if you're a visual processor and you use lots of paper. You just keep flipping the pages, new topic, make a new middle bubble. Because probably in a situation like your teacher is probably saying, now with phone surveys, it's very important that you call and make an appointment and set a time and call later and have prepared questions. So all of those things would be little lines coming off of this with their own little information assigned to them. All right? Any questions? Would you take out a piece of paper? I hope you have one. If you don't, you can borrow one. And I want to try something. I'd like you to just take a stab at clustering. So I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you as if I were a teacher of educational theory, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so that's the subject. All right, and they're saying Bloom's taxonomy. What is that? Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm just going to say, well, today we're talking about Bloom's taxonomy. All right, now, and so what your job right now is to take out a piece of paper or several, and with your pen, see if you can keep a cluster series of notes for what I'm about to tell you. And then we'll see what you come up with. You can share with your fellow workshop folks. Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy. First of all, we'd say, well, what is a taxonomy? We would say, well, a taxonomy is, does anyone know what a taxonomy is? Any science majors out there? Something comes up in biology a lot. So basically a taxonomy is a way of sort of ordering things, putting things in some kind of order, and usually it's an order that has a hierarchy. In other words, it's got an upper end and a lower end. All right. So Bloom's taxonomy it came out of is in the 50s, actually. It came up because of Sputnik. And you, no doubt, do not remember Sputnik, but I at least was alive when Sputnik had happened. Sputnik was the Russians basically beat us to space. You know, they put a satellite in space and before we did, and we were shocked as a nation. Couldn't believe it. You know, it's like, there are none of those large gloves that have 2 fingers on them, right? We're number 2, right? We couldn't take it. It was like, what do you mean they beat us to space? This is an outrage. So what it led to was a kind of a big self-assessment of how we were teaching in America and what's going on in the colleges. And the study group, who was headed by, well, actually it wasn't headed by, it's just his name started with a B, so he was at the head of the list alphabetically. Now he gets all the credit, see? So if you're going to do academic research in your future, you might want to change your last name to something that starts with an A, you know? Maybe Aardvark, 2 A's, you know? So Bloom's taxonomy was an attempt to sort of, well, talk about what is meant by intellectual difficulty. You know, in other words, what's harder than what up here mentally? And what they came up with was, they said that if you look at this as a pyramid, you would say at the bottom of the pyramid is memorization. All right? So memorization, that just means you read something, can you repeat back what you've read? Just, you know, verbatim. And one step up from that is what we were just talking, which is sometimes called understanding. But, you know, just as with the Cornell Method, if you Google this stuff, you'll see many variations on Bloom as well. But this is sort of the basic one. So memorization, lowest level. One step higher in terms of difficulty is understanding. Sometimes it's called comprehension. And the way you actually verify comprehension is by summary. Okay? So whereas memorization is just kind of repeating, summarizing means condensing, first of all, and then putting it in your own words. Okay, we've already talked about how that helps you remember stuff. And above that is application. And application means, can you take an idea or a concept and apply it to a situation? All right. So what would be an example of that? What in your, you know, your academic life requires that you apply things? When are you asked to apply stuff? I'm sorry?
Like in what kind of class? Like in lab?
Sure. Lab is one a classic example of, you know, we've learned some concepts, let's test them in a lab and see if we can apply what we know up here to real life experience, or with physical objects usually. Sure. When else are you asked to apply stuff?
When you're asked to do a lecture, like when you're asked to step in front of the class and do a lecture.
Okay, and how is that, where's the application there?
You have to, ahead of time, you have to prepare for it. And
Right.
then you have to either practice in front of a mirror in front of your friends, and then take it into action when you go.
There you go. There you go. So you have to sort of begin probably by summarizing what you know, do some preparation, and then out of this preparation you apply it at the moment where you stand up and give a performance of some kind. Right. Okay? You know, you might be learning basics of grammar, and you're asked to apply it by writing sentences. You know? Concepts of essay writing, you learn them, you try to apply them by writing essays. You're in athletics, you're learning concepts about how to hit a baseball, and then you stand up to the plate and try to do so. All right, so it's all this sort of, I've got the idea, now how do I put it to, can I identify it first of all, now can I put it into practice? All right, so I'm just going to quickly tell you the others because I know you're dying of curiosity. You've got analysis, and above that is synthesis. And these two, by the way, analysis would be sort of like, you know, you could analyze these 5 digits, you know, these 5 fingers individually and say, well, what are they? How do they work? But if you were going to synthesize these 5 things that you'd analyzed, it means you take them and you combine them and you turn them into something else. So in other words, you might go from something like this to something like this, right? Which is a very different thing. You know, a fist, right, is a mode of synthesis because you've taken 5 things, you've recombined them, and you've sort of changed the function too, right? You know, When you meet someone, you don't go like this, right? Well, I mean, you might. It depends on the nature of the meeting, I guess. But, typically you go like this, which is another way of synthesizing these 5 fingers, right? Okay, and the last thing is evaluation. And evaluation, where you say, is it good, is it bad, does it work, does it not? That's considered the highest level of intellectual activity. And, if you think about it, culturally, we tend to sort of leap to evaluation. We're very quick to evaluate things. But then what happens? Then there's sort of an inquiry maybe. Like you say, well, I thought this film was superb, right? And you say, well, why was it superb? Well, then you're going to have to start going back down here and looking at the various parts of it to decide, well, what was it about this film that really got you to think of it as excellent? Yeah.
If you were learning math, how would you give an example of it?
Yeah. Well, I would say in math you have to memorize formula, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to take those things and what do you do with them? Who's taken basic math in here? Okay, what do you memorize in a it's like an introductory math class? Let's stick with that. Okay, first rote memorization, multiplication tables, right? This times this equals this. There's a lot of that. That's sort of more of a time-saving thing. What else do you memorize in math?
Formulas.
Formulas like?
Y1 or y equals mx plus b, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, so there's certain, and isn't there an order of, what is it called? Order of operations? That's it? Yeah, see, it's been a while. Order of operations. And you memorize that. And I know many of you have, and then you would take that and you would apply it. First of all, you'd have to sort of understand it by telling somebody else. And if I were to say, well, what does that mean, order of operations? What does that mean? Somebody? Parentheses first and...
Multiplication, division, adding, and subtraction.
Okay, does that correct everyone? And what was it? Yeah, okay, so you might have a little acronym to help you remember what those stages are. A word that you come up with that will help you with the first letter of each thing. Okay, so you just memorized it, and as she was doing this, she was going like this, and she's thinking, and she's summarizing, right? So she's building her understanding in that act. And then we can't really do it here because I don't have anything for you to solve. But if we did, you would say, okay, I'm going to take that concept now, I'm going to look at this string of figures, and I'm going to put them in some kind of order. Now what are you doing? You're applying what you've learned. And really a lot of math is down here. A whole lot of it is. Now when you get into a thing of like, okay, I screwed up on my math test, then you've got to sort of go up here and think about, well, where did I go wrong? Let me analyze this and figure out at what stage in this process did I screw up? Okay? Yeah.
Would the evaluation be the test?
No, but that's a good, well, that was a bit sudden, wasn't it? No, it's not the test. It's not the test. A test is a form of evaluation, for sure. But this means evaluation in a different way. It means evaluation in terms of, well, it would be sort of you get your test back and you look at it and you say, well, I did well on this test or I did not. Or you might get the test and you go, this test is a good sort of test of my knowledge, or this test sucks, this doesn't test my knowledge at all. It's a badly written test, That's a form of evaluation. So, now I'm trying to think, your instructors are evaluating you, but that's really, it's a different kind of thing because it's a set instrument. This is more like it could go either way, So this is more in the realm of, this is an effective teacher or not so effective teacher. You're evaluating that, and you're evaluating it on the basis of, data in a way, or information that you've taken in. Okay? So, yes?
I'm curious about, so the understanding and that comprehension is, and I get that summarizing and especially putting in your own words. If you think you understand something, but then have trouble reiterating it into your own words, is it that you actually didn't understand it?
That's right. It means your understanding of something is incomplete. That's right. And guess what? And by the way, we are going to get back to note-taking here any second. that very process is something we tend to think of learning as, I don't understand it, now I understand it. It's not like that. It's hardly ever like that. And in fact, here's the worst thing. We tend to think of, I don't know this or I don't understand this, that's bad. I'm flawed. I have failed, right? Or you say, I'm confused, as if that's a bad thing. You know, being confused is not a bad thing. Being confused is a normal thing. Being confused is how you learn, because it's out of confusion that we learn, right? I mean, if you think about it logically, if you were never confused, it would mean your knowledge base would never have been challenged. It would be the same. It wouldn't go anywhere. It would just sit there, you know, flat, dead on the table, right? Confusion is the thing that inspires us to grow. That's how we learn. So, you know, you've got to realize, like, when you're summarizing something and you say, oh, I don't quite get that, or I left that part out, or something, that's fine. That's a normal part of the process. And these tools are just designed to help you in that process. So it's not quite so painful. So you don't feel like you're just starting over every time. You have a method, okay? Now, I have a question about in terms of method. You were taking notes with clustering, I hope. You didn't, you know, sort of lose that part of it. So what was in the center of your cluster? We can get rid of this now. What goes in the middle? Yeah, that's probably it, right? So you've got Bloom's taxonomy in the middle. And what are the major things coming off of that?
The definition of taxonomy.
Okay, taxonomy.
50, Sputnik.
And then you might have Sputnik. And by the way, you know, you might, in a note-taking environment, you say, Sputnik, you know, I got to write down everything he says about Sputnik. But really, if you can come back to your notes soon enough, you won't have to, because you'll just remember. It's just that the memory it's a very small and delicate thing. And as I can testify from personal experience, it grows smaller and more delicate with age. You know, so you all are lucky. You've still got these robust memories, but they're still, think of it as a tiny, delicate box. You know, you don't want to stuff it too full. So, you know, at any one time. So if you just wrote down Sputnik and you came back to this within a couple of hours, you would remember enough to put a line, and good, what did you remember? Russians, space, anxiety, yeah, like that, 50s, yeah, all that stuff. And that's all you need to remember, really. Sorry?
Epic Cold War competition.
Cold War, that's even better. But see, now you're getting into like, that's like analysis. It is, and that's great, that's fine. You know, Cold War anxiety competition. That's what it was. It was part of the Cold War. Okay, what else? So we've got taxonomy. We've got Sputnik. What else did you remember from that?
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy. Okay, so we say hierarchy is sort of what it is. So this might be something you would go like this, right? Because they're kind of connected. And you can use lines that way. Hierarchy and taxonomies are connected. Yes?
I had an aha moment,
Uh-huh.
and this is the memorization. Like, you can teach a mouse to memorize how to get to cheese, but this separates us from animals, this hierarchy of learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. You know, that's a great, I mean, then you get, there's a sort of philosophical dimension to that about it does separate us, and so that's another taxonomy. But I've always think about that stuff, you know, it's like, now who's making up these taxonomies? You know, we're not asking the rabbits, you know, because we can't communicate with them, which we take to be their failing, you know. So it's a curious thing, but we think of it sometimes as a food chain, you know, what eats what, basically, is in terms of a hierarchy, that's a food chain. And we do put ourselves at the top of the food chain, but on the basis of brains and technology, you know, brains, weapons, like that. So that can change, as people know who've been out hunting in their rifle jams. You know, suddenly they're no longer at the top of the food chain. Okay, so what else about this, though? What about Bloom's taxonomy? What are the other?
Education.
Say it again?
Education.
Education. So it was education. So it was kind of education reform, maybe you might say. I'd probably put that in there. And did anybody write down the major parts of Bloom? Because I wrote it on the board in a triangle, so what would you maybe want to have done with that? You might want to have copied it on a piece of paper that was the same shape as the board, right? And put it on the same place on the piece of paper that it was on the board. so you remember it. But you can also, again, reduplicate it over here, and the main parts of it are what? What's the lowest level of Bloom? Okay, so memorization, so you could just say memorization, and maybe you might want to put a 1 by it so you know it's the lowest. And what's the next one? Okay, so it's understanding, and again, because you don't know what the sequence is here of events, you might want to put a 2 on that, right, and so forth. So you've got, memorization, understanding, application, and just for future knowledge, because, Bloom isn't really a sequence. It doesn't mean that when you're thinking about stuff, you have to start at the bottom and then gradually work your way up through the steps, because the brain just doesn't operate that way. It's just to let you know, well, how difficult is this question I'm being asked to do? And by the way, as a teaching device, and it does get used by teachers a lot, they'll use Bloom. Well, this could be useful to you as students, actually. Many of your teachers are using Bloom because they'll ask a question to a class or to an individual, and if the individual is sort of struggling, and again, knowledge acquisition is what? It's confusion and struggle. That's how you get there. So if they're struggling to a point where they can't do anything, then usually what you try to do is just ask a question that is at a lower level on Bloom. All right? So in other words, if I've asked you to analyze something, and with a little practice, it becomes very clear to you what the nature of the question is. But if I asked you to analyze something and you can't do it, then I would probably say, well, let's not talk about what it means. Let's talk about what it is. What is it? Identify it. And now you're down to a level of understanding, right? Okay, then having once identified it, then you can return to the question that's more analytical, and typically a student is then sort of prepared to better answer that question. So there's a colleague who's also Jeff's boss, and I years ago made this, it was his inspiration, I should give him full credit, for this thing we called the Verbinator, and based on an old Saturday Night Live skit called the Bassomatic, where the idea was you took your assignment, and it's out there still somewhere. You took your assignment, you just dump it into this field, and it pulls all the verbs out of the assignment. And then all of those verbs are assigned to some level of Bloom, so that a student could look at that and say, well, what am I being asked to do in this assignment? I'm going to have to do some analysis. I'm going to have to do some, just summary. I'm going to have to do some evaluation. It didn't exactly take off, but it was I think it's something worth considering. When you're looking at an assignment that you're given, underline the verbs and see how they do apply to Bloom. And it will give you a better handle on what's expected of you as a student. All right, so we're just about out of time. So on this handout I gave you, it basically summarizes what we've talked about today. There are some things about abbreviating, condensing. I think if you were to, let me just ask you this, again, as a kind of to put into practice what we've been preaching here. If you're going to summarize what we just talked about, what would you say is one key concept in good note-taking? What's one good thing you can do as a note-taker?
Organizing.
Organizing them. Okay. And what else can you do as a good note-taker?
Take time.
Take time? Okay. And in what sense? Could you elaborate on that? How?
Take time in the sense of relax and better focused in that sense.
Good. Okay. Take time, and then what else in relation to what he just said about taking time? As a basic concept in note-taking. Spaces. Leave plenty of spaces. Okay, and related to that, what's a basic concept in note-taking?
Review your notes right away.
Go back and review them as soon as you possibly can. Use the space that's available. Oh, and by the way, there are a couple of you said, I have too many notes. I said, that is great. Because what that means is you look at your notes, you sift through them, you summarize them yourself. And that in itself is a great learning tool, right? Extracting stuff. Okay, so take time, get back to them soon, leave plenty of space, try some different techniques, right? It doesn't have to be written out in sentences. Get as many words on the page as you can. Try clustering. It's weird at first, but after you've tried it a few times, you may find it's very comfortable for you. Okay, well, thank you for your attention. And I encourage you to come to future workshops.